Deze, denk ik. Yeah, there I am. Very good. As I wrote you already, it's a bit of a first-time experiment, so I'm really excited to be able to do this. So welcome to VUCA at Work. And VUCA is actually a very hot team, so very nice that you're all joining and watching this with me. We will show you some information, and with me is Ferry. Ferry is the event manager of this. Actually, if I look over my laptop, he's sitting across me, so that's very nice. So together we're going to run this, and hopefully no technical issues. The live stream was interrupted shortly, so the old link in my email did not work. Hopefully you've been able to find me via LinkedIn. Today we're going to spend 60 minutes on the webinar itself, so really content driven, mainly a one-way stream. However, the chat will be there for you to ask questions and to see if you can also fill in elements that you are requesting. And there will be 30 minutes of Q&A also via the chat. And then the chat is open as of now, so we will be able to monitoring this with you together. Ferry will be watching the chat for us, and afterwards a recording and the handout will be sent to the people who participated. In the LinkedIn environment, the whole recording will remain as a post, so you always are able to go back to the full content of this webinar, this web event, I should say, actually. And last but not least, you will be invited for a membership of the VUCA leadership community, all free, of course, just to see if a discussion should continue and we can learn a lot from each other. So for that much, that's for a short introduction. Before doing a full introduction on myself and some other things, I really want to focus on what can you expect from this 60 minutes as a takeaway. And of course, VUCA is a term that some of you might have heard. For some, it might be something new. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this case, we focus on what is that meaning for the workplace. I'll explain a bit of the background of VUCA in a later stage. And in this session, your key takeaways will be being able to recognize how VUCA plays a role in your workplace, how that impacts dynamics in your workplace. Thirdly, how actually does that change your decision-making process? And there is quite some impact. And then, of course, there's also an impact for the team. So working in a VUCA environment is not just a leadership challenge, it's actually a challenge for the whole team, and it does have impact in how teams interact with each other. So, and we'll finish with coping strategies, and these are really leadership focused. How can a leader in a VUCA environment apply these strategies in such a way that team dynamics, decision-making process, etc., are done in the right way? As said, it's a 60 minutes, 30 minutes combination handout, and the community is all on top. And here you have some extra information that is for people who watch the video afterwards. Agenda-wise, obviously, the takeaways we've just done. Secondly, does VUCA actually really exist, and how can we see that? How can we observe VUCA in action? So I'll bring to you some proof, some practical examples, so you really understand VUCA in a better way, and you can actually place VUCA in this way. Thirdly, if you are at the workplace, what sort of symptoms should you actually be observing to understand this is really a VUCA thing, so you can place it and you can actually choose the right coping strategy for it. Focus on the workplace dynamics, so especially in younger organizations where agile working, for instance, is already applicable, you will find that workplace dynamics do have a complete different way of management and a day of working. than compared to more classical organizations. I now have experience in both, so I've been able to compare them with each other in a very nice way. I think that will give some enlightening insights if you listen to the full story. Also for decision making, as said, it's not just about data. We want to make decisions more and more on data, but maybe not a big surprise for you, but for me it was a bit of a surprise. It's also an art to be able to make decisions, and an art to make decisions when you do not have a complete data set, or there are uncertainties in the process, and still you have to make a decision. So that calls for different decision-making processes. Team dynamics is really about creating resilient teams, resilient people in your teams. How do you actually help people to become more resilient? And how do you help create an interdependent culture? Interdependent here meaning when do you know when to step forward and to really get into action to get the deliverables done, or when to step back and allow somebody else to actually focus on their deliverables, because they, for the total picture, are more important than just your own. So the step from independent and only focus on your own and your own team performance to interdependent, focus on teams together performance, is quite a big step to take these days. Then number 7 is the coping strategies, which is really the summary of all the elements before, but then really focus on what can you do as a leader in the organization and with your team to get VUCA working for you instead of being a roadblock for you. So how do you stay grounded, resilient, and adaptable? How can you help reducing stress, but also, for instance, foster the psychological safety required to really have functional teams and build that adaptability into your daily routines for yourself, but also for your team. And last but not least, there is the questions and answer section that takes place. See if you can get there in time. So 50 minutes to go. So let's focus on, does VUCA really exist? And if you want to stop me for a question, just put them into the chat. That's all fine. Does VUCA exist? Well, first of all, volatility is really caused by the unrelenting pace of change. And if you think of change, that can be in many ways, right? So change is I would say, the common theme in many things that we do. So the way I read unrelenting pace of change really is about the rate of unpredictable change, especially in markets where technology plays a role. It is really applicable. Economists and management researchers have really shown that volatility in business environments is closely linked to a rapid technology advancement, but also related to geopolitical shifts. And especially, I work in a company where geopolitics really play a big role, ASML. I can tell you it does have an impact in the way we work. But also economical cycles. For some markets, economical cycles looks different than for other markets. So if you want to have evidence, we'll show you some graphs that really focus on this. Secondly, uncertainty. Uncertainty in VUCA relates to the difficulty of predicting future events or outcomes. So theories of uncertainty in business were popularized by Frank Knight in the early 20th century, distinguishing measurable risk from true uncertainty, where probabilities are unknown. It's really interesting to read about it. So if you Google on Frank Knight, you will find some interesting insights in how you segregate between measurable risks and true uncertainties. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence that uncertainty has grown as a result of global interdependence and the rapid and often unpredictable change and advances of technology. Other things like Brexit, global pandemics, shifting trade policies also highlight how difficult it has become to forecast outcomes. The world is really a different place, and that's why we use VUCA to make it more manageable for us. As a third point here, complexity. Complexity is really about the multitude of interconnected parts within one system. I will say that again. Multiple interconnected parts within a system. If you approach a problem from a systems point of view, you get a real different picture than just focus on a person, a product, or a department. If you take the full system into consideration, you will find different solutions and most likely more effective solutions. So complexity is really an important component that we need to take into account. Fourthly, ambiguity, of course, the last one of VUCA, is really about navigating without a clear roadmap. And what I mean with that is unclear information, unclear meanings, or intentions, making an interpretation challenging. Studies in strategic management have focused on ambiguity since the 70s, particularly in decision-making theory, where ambiguity has risen with the spread of global information networks, disinformation, obviously, and involving stakeholders' expectations. So a lot of people ask questions about these things, are unsure about outcomes, and ambiguity means there might be various versions of the truth. So we'll focus on that. And as a summary, I would say, which is this slide, as a summary, we can conclude research across these elements of VUCA collectively suggests that technology advancements, think of AI and digital connectivity, have been the key drivers since the 2000s and creating really environments with heightened volatility, complexity, and ambiguity. So global independence has really made a local disruption more impactful on a global scale, but also amplifying uncertainty and complexity. Political and social, I also mentioned, so that's a big one. But as last, let's conclude that VUCA really exists if we think of some of the elements mentioned here. Yes, while VUCA is indeed a growing reality backed by research across multiple disciplines, its exponential growth particularly intensified in the last 20 years, mainly due to the convergence of technology development, globalization of systems, and also the rapid social, political changes that are occurring in the world. So also from an organizational point of view, because that's what we look at, this is VUCA at work, organizational level, we also increasingly are focusing on VUCA readiness and the resilience building to adapt to this new normal. We need to drive the need for VUCA-focused leadership, skills, and strategies. That's very clear. I've delivered this workshop several times now in various organizations. Once you get the inside view of this and you learn about the coping strategies, management really looks differently when you compare it to when, at least on my age, when I started as a manager. So better coping strategies now really help us to move on. Which brings us already to the third section of this presentation. Recognizing VUCA, what are the symptoms that we see? And so to lead effectively today, we really need a clear understanding of what forces are shaping our environment. VUCA really defines the landscape in many organizations, and each element is challenging and is challenging for our traditional approaches to management. So in this session, we'll unpack each of these and also look at the terms a little bit more and how they show up in our daily operations. This is a picture where data presents, it's an illustrative graph though, but it presents really the concept of market demands and how it shifts due to the technology advancements. As you can see, the tech-driven product line is rising rapidly, and note the year axis on the bottom. It's only for 6 years that you see this development, and also the traditional products and how they go down to almost 40%, 45%. So there is a major shift going on in the last 6-7 years in the world. This market research is coming from companies like Gartner, Statistica, Forrester Research. So there's, although they are not, it's not exact data. It's based on well-known institutions and well-known reports that actually present this kind of data. Secondly, I would like to ask some questions on this and more questions to you. So have you been involved already in a digital transformation in your organization? Or is AI already implemented in your department or your organization? Or do you have new operational ERP platforms that need to be upgraded or implemented? Or the fourth one, new business intelligence, trusted data sets and building those and using them, for instance, for performance management. I'd like to hear from you in the chat whether these are now already valid to you. And if so, please note that in the chat. So I'll give you a minute to answer this in the chat. Dat was de 10. I get a message, no, can't post messages to some channels, but I'm looking to Ferry now. I don't see it on my phone as well. Should we continue? Okay. Probably something technical. I brought another graph to really show what this is all about. Let me have a look. This data set is really to demonstrate the concept of market demand shift due to technological advancements, rather than derived from specific industry data. So in a real world scenario, this data would be gathered from many sources like McKinsey, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, etc. So I've used quite a number of reports to build this report altogether. If you look to this, you see the pressure that actually is applied to decide quickly. I'm sure as a leader, you experience this as well, that we need to make decisions with not everything that we want available, not every data that we want available, or not every viewpoint that we want to consider being available. Also, and especially in an operational environments where I spend a lot of my time, the unpredictability of planning or changes in planning. I think that also has a major effect on the way of working, and that is also shown in this graph. And last but not least, what is the reactive approach in change? Because all these changes will have are caused by for instance, planning, but at the same time, this change requirements give a lot of pressure to the leadership. So looking to this in a bit more detail, it emphasizes really how VUCA put pressure in a compounded way over time. And maybe I should show the next slide, because then the compound version of that slide is done. Here you see the stacking of, if you do the compound version of that graph, and what it actually means is that if you compare 2018 from 2024, you see that the overall pressure on especially leadership and teams has actually doubled in only 6 years. So that is actually quite significant and something to really be thoughtful of when we do our leadership and the way we work in organizations. If you think of consequences, if we have to spend more and more time on dealing with the symptoms that we have in this graph, you see elements like strategic workforce and talent management being suffering from it. You probably have heard about the term silent resignation, which is now happening in a lot of companies. It's either people leave, so it's turnover, or people actually only do what is needed but don't go the extra mile, which means they actually are not as productive as they can be. We also see a lot of burnout. I think in the European area, it's, I think, one absenteeism reason number 1 or 2 already in most companies. So a very big concern for organizations. Thirdly, the adoption of change, friction between running and change the business. I'm not sure if you recognize this, but for me, this is always very visible, that running the business and solving problems in running the business really creates the fourth point, the firefighting attitude that we have in organizations, which takes time and attention away from what do we need to do to structurally solve problems. And that really becomes a concern when you get into this vicious cycle of how things need to be solved, and there's no time for thinking about how to avoid things. Also, the question here could be, it's not on this slide, but could also be, do we actually recognize and reward people who actually help avoid problems? Because how do you prove you have avoided the problem? So we are so much data focused these days that if somebody brings up a good idea and it helps avoiding a problem to happen, is it actually being recognized as a very useful thing to do? My experience is that very often, or at least sometimes, that's not recognized, and people are not willing to invest time and resources into this. So now let's look to, now we have done the VUCA components. Let's have a look here and go through a number of scenarios. So this is scenario one. We have rapid shifts in market demand due to technological advances, which causes frequent changes in customer preferences. So the demands become differently. How do we see that? What are the symptoms of this? Well, we have clearly pressure to make quick decisions because of the frequency of changes. It becomes more unpredictable in terms of planning, because if the customer demands changes, then obviously we need to respond as an organization. And we become more reactive in our approach to certain change. Secondly, there's also a number of things we can do about this, which really is about thinking ahead, and that starts with scenario planning. So just not just take the current demand for what it is, actually develop multiple potential scenarios and prepare for shifting between the scenarios that you have prepared. You can also think of flexible strategy maps, build strategies that can pivot easily as markets evolve. I think that is a really important one for all of us. Yeah, that was. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term sun chart, but the sun chart is really to map out your long-term goals and understand what are the elements that are really contributing to the success of achieving the long-term goal. So a sun chart is, I would say, even the level above the roadmap level for building plans to execute on strategy. And having a sun chart will help you remind what is the long-term aim, and will help you to step away from sometimes the firefighting and ad hoc problem-solving culture, and also have time for structural solutions. From a leadership perspective, what really helps here is to have a servant leadership style. And if you're not familiar with this style, my advice would be to Google on it. There's so much written about servant leadership style. Servant leadership style for me means basically you put people centrally. You know when to step forward as a leader, but you also know when to step backward as a leader. And the real question that's constantly in your mind is, how can I help somebody to actually perform better or to become a better version of him or herself? And therefore, especially psychological safety is a very important component to that. Last and not least, embrace agility, which is something else than working agile. So embracing agility is really about being able to apply flexibility in the way you work. And it really also is helpful if tooling and adaptive technologies are used. So you can actually really embrace agility in the way of working in the organization. Now, agile way of working obviously is a component of that, but I would say embracing agility, that is really something, that is a mindset that you need to bring as a leader, and will give a very strong message to the people with you. Yeah, so do you apply servant leadership, and how do you visualize volatility in a sun chart? Would be great. That's a question from Rutger. Thank you, Rutger, for that. And the previous question was a question that you put in.
Just comment.
Okay, it was just a comment. Okay. How do you visualize volatility in a sun chart? I think, Rutger, thank you for asking the question. A sun chart really does have a number of, as they call them, beams, sun rays. You could actually plot a number of scenarios in the sun chart, so you can actually jump from one beam to another, depending on what is changing, so where the volatility really pops in the sun chart. And to be honest, the sun chart in itself is it's at such a level, at such a high level of visualization of a strategic objective, that volatility is more inside the components of the sun chart than the total sun chart in itself. And I hope that answers your questions a little bit. Ailey, thanks for bringing this question up. Scenario planning and the pandemic gave clarity to this. Well, clearly did. I totally agree with you. And only a few had an exit strategy in my experience. Yeah, indeed. Is it the same for others? I think you see a number of organizations really changed and reinvented themselves during and especially after the pandemic, when we went back to business as usual. An exit strategy, I think only a few indeed, as you also observed. I didn't see any more companies than only a few. I do believe that more companies now are doing scenario planning and do have more contingency planning in place to deal with the next pandemic or similar type of crisis that might hit a market or the world. So I myself will also work in the semiconductor industry, which is a very volatile market by itself. So that market is, and the companies in that market are actually doing a lot of scenario planning because they do know they have to be able to jump high volume, low volume, which has major impact on the way they operate and the way they organize themselves. So I think we can learn. I know Lee is from the logistics industry, at least in the past. I think logistics could also learn something from the semiconductor industry, because the level of volatility is different than the volatility that also exists in the logistics market by itself, by nature. They have different components that causes the volatility. And so I think there is something to learn from each other if we really bring people together. By the way, this is also the reason why I want to set up this VUCA community, because by bringing people together from different industries, I think there is a lot to learn going forward. Thanks, Ferry, for that comment on YouTube. That's a good one. So an unpredictable policy of changes, for instance, by regulatory requirements, always impacts an operation of a company or an organization. So there's always a lot, and the consequence and the symptoms you see as a leader is always there's a difficulty in long-term planning. It also lowers the risk appetite that usually organizations have, and you can actually start feeling stuck in decision-making processes. That means you're waiting too long, it's getting too slow. So if you think of that, if you do a good risk and issue analysis, as it's called in project management, that is something that's really important. You can anticipate already on the number of risks and deal with them, and you could even decide that you accept a risk to exist or is not able to mitigate in the right way. There are various frameworks you can use for this. The same is for data-driven decision making. Very often organizations use historical data and far less the real-time data that's available. So there is always a risk in making decisions based on historical data versus what's happening today. And the third one here is building resilience with your teams, empower them, because the lower in the organization you put decision-making power, the more accurate and the more timely the responses will be if things change. And especially in ambiguous situations, that is something that people really require. If people feel they can steer, they can control some elements, they can take decisions on some elements, ambiguity becomes far less of an issue for them. So that's what you can do as a leader. Now let's look to another scenario. This is about complexity. Managing global supply chains with multiple dependencies and interrelated processes can lead to cascading impact. Something happens on one place and then the cascading process really moves on into the chain. COVID obviously was a very big example of what happened, and it really disrupted the bigger supply chains in the world, probably also the small ones. So if we look at it, there is you can be overwhelmed by interconnected issues because it's all happening. It seems all to be happening at the same time, and it is also difficult at that stage to identify root causes. So people are feeling confused, don't know where to start, and then also managing the stakeholders and their expectations is becoming a difficult part because they also don't know what is happening or why are things happening. So you don't get really the support from, for instance, your senior stakeholders. So there also you really need to think about how does the system work. So don't focus on the issues you only see. Think of how things relate to each other and try to approach it as a total system. Because it's like the body, right? You can take the body apart, but nothing will create what a human being is. Not a single part of the body can actually represent a human being. Only the combination of all the parts together is the human being. So that's also how you need to approach organizations. It is a system that works together, and if you only look at one or two departments or one or two products and so on, you only look to a very small slice and you don't understand then what is the impact of the total system. So system thinking is something that I think now is really kicking off in many organizations, and also it has a lot to do with culture in organizations. Secondly, cross-functional teams. Really, if you want to foster collaboration across departments or even divisions, it's complex. Especially when you will solve problems, the relationship between problems, and that comes a little bit back to the system thinking, of course. We tend to stick into our silos where we work. We tend to prioritize our silos, which means we are independent and not interdependent working. I think there is a lot to gain and a lot to do. So as a leader, if you feel your department or your team is not connected in the right way, make sure they are getting connected in a cross-functional way or a cross-silo way if you want, because that would give you different insights in solving problems. And last on this page, and then I'll come to your question, Lee, there's a lot of tools and methodologies that you can apply in this area, Lean Six Sigma being one of them. They have an enormous toolbox. If you train people in your organization like a green belt or a black belt, you can have a lot of problem-solving power and improvement power at the shop floor. At the same time, these are also people who can help you frame a problem in the right way. And they do have tools to objectify the problems in a good way. So you're actually working on the right cause of the problem and not just on the symptoms of the problem. Then coming to Lee's question, thanks Lee. Cross-functional upstream and downstream connections become important as many processes are interconnected. Many people either do not know this or make the connection. Is this increasing? Let me read that again. Cross-functional up and downstream. Yeah, become more important. Yes. Yeah, really good one. So the way I work at the moment in the ASML company might be a good example. ASML works with 3,500 suppliers, give or take. They all have their own unique component to bring into the way ASML builds systems. So the environment of all this is a really good one. So both up and downstream, we need to be really well connected, because if the customers makes a change in their requirements, that has to come through down to the whole chain, including our suppliers. So it becomes more and more important. That also means that processes are indeed interconnected, as you already mentioned, Lee. And the knowledge people have about this and the way to act in these processes is really important. This is increasing. I think the dependencies between organizations is growing. I think also in companies like FedEx. I used to work for FedEx some time ago. I know Lee did as well. the amount of suppliers in a supply chain like FedEx is operating is enormous. So there also, if you want to improve your service, you have to improve relationships. You have to improve, therefore, also the knowledge, both inside your company and outside your company, to make sure a chain works. So very good question, a very good point. So the ability as a leader to build those connections is a very important one. Great question. Another scenario, this one is about ambiguity. It occurs really when information is unclear, and I'm sure we all experience that every now and then. Can be incomplete, or it's really difficult to make a good interpretation of it. For instance, leaders may face unclear regulations, fake stakeholder expectations, or conflicting market data. I think more and more this is happening, and looking to the symptoms of this, really, how do we see this at the workplace? People get confused around strategic priorities. What is the priority, or what do they mean with the strategic objectives that are set, and especially the alignment to the decision-making processes. Are we making decisions in the light of the strategic objectives, or is it about ad hoc problems that we really get? So looking at that, and I'll come to your question in a minute, Rutger, if I finish this slide. Thank you. For ambiguity to solve, also, scenario planning is one of the tools. The flexible strategic maps you see here in the sun chart, it looks like the same as the previous slide, to be honest, but not the last one. Encourage open dialogue. So the encouragement to, well, first dialogue. There's quite a difference between a discussion and a dialogue. In a discussion, you have a loser and a winner, because you want to know who is right. In a dialogue, that's not the question. In a dialogue, the aim is to understand each other's opinions and visions, and bring them together to create together a new vision on things. So I think if you learn how to have a dialogue with people, and really have an open dialogue, then you will come to new solutions and new ways of working, which is very different to when you do a discussion, and you also get the behavior of, I would say, old management, who's right, who's wrong. So let's get back to the question of Rutger. You're getting questions in, that's great. It wasn't the question. So it's a comment indeed. So the power of to influence the system as you approach an organization as a system is at senior management. I think they have more influence, Rutger, indeed, but I think everybody is capable of having some influence on the system. So in the end, also, if I still compare it to our human body, there are bigger parts and smaller parts, and the brain is one of the key components. You can say control room of the body. At the same time, if the parts don't function in the right way, then the brain can do whatever it wants, but it doesn't come through. If the nerves don't pass the signals, things don't happen. So in the end, it all need to function in the right way, and can influence each other. But you're right in the terms that I would say senior management is the one at the steering wheel, therefore has more influence on the changes that you want. So that's a good one. I also saw something from Lee coming by. Oh, no, that's a thank you. Last one for this. How are we doing on time? We have 20 minutes to go, so I probably have to rush a little bit. Today's VUCA environment, leaders face challenges really, around VUCA, especially on decision making and strategic planning. Symptoms you will find on the workplace is, the sudden market shifts, alignment and strategies, internal change a lot, the urge to make quick decisions, people doing unpredictable demands or getting new people in. Is changing quite a lot. So there will be a difference between the new people coming in on their terms for the labor agreements versus the existing workforce, which can lead to new problems. So there's a lot changing around this. So unstable workforce management is basically what I would focus on. And this is maybe something to remember, but as a leader, if you really see symptoms of volatility, the key thing to remember is that vision is the first thing to think of. So, and because both the table shows you VUCA in two ways, right? It's the cause and the potential solution. So volatility is really helped by a good vision and a strong vision. Uncertainty is really helped by good understanding. So if you have a good broad understanding of how processes work, whatever process becomes uncertain, the full understanding of it will help you to manage and to bring it to a success. Complexity is really countered by clarity. If you really see things straight, whatever complex system people bring to you, you will be able to bring it down to the things that are needed. And ambiguity is really helped by agility in terms of the multiple versions of truth can really be managed through an agile way of working, and also having an agility component in your mindset. I have not written them out in detail, but here again you see tools that you can use, and maybe the OODA. I'm not sure if you know that one. It's coming from the American military. Excuse me. I have an example of that later on in this presentation, so I'll work out a little bit of an example there. Clarification of techniques in incremental decision making, meaning decision making is broken down to a number of steps, and learning mindset, or also known as growth mindset. The learning mindset is really be curious and having questions, trying to understand other approaches versus taking the approach you know is working. I think I see a lot of leaders doing that. They had success in certain ways. They want to copy the way they had success, but when the circumstances have changed, the success you had in the past is no guarantee for the success in the future. So there you really need to think and to learn how to do things in a different way. So those were 4 scenarios for each of the letters of VUCA. I hope this was a bit helpful in understanding what is VUCA and how can I recognize VUCA at the workplace, and what sort of tooling do I have in my toolbox, or maybe can I bring in my toolbox by learning it going forward. Then we go to the 4th chapter on this one, which is about the workplace dynamics. Workplace dynamics is really about what are the characteristics that we have in place there. What does it mean for team structure? And that can actually mean a lot. What is the uncertainty in the role expectation? I'm not sure about you, but what I experience in my work very often is that people ask, well, this is not part of my job prescription, or this is not part of the profile. Should we do this? Should we not do this? So the question is not about what have we agreed. The question is about, can we bring things to a good end with the capabilities that we have around? So that creates uncertainty in role expectations, and we need to be able to deal with that as a leader. The same, and I'll a little bit touch on that already, the complexity in cross-functional collaboration. Now, last but not least, I work in a company that has a matrix in a matrix, so a very complicated organization. If you work in a matrix organization, there's always confusion about communication and reporting lines in various ways, in various dimensions, with various levels of impact, I would say. Nevertheless, it really gives you sometimes the ambiguity in, and then you get rules like whoever pays decides. That is sort of how people make things controllable for themselves if they are not sure about what is the best decision to take. So ambiguity has a big impact on people, but at the end also on the decisions we take in organizations. One of the things that are really coming out of this workplace dynamics is that we see now there is a high increase in turnover, both internally and externally, and that industry disruption is really taking place right now. People are finding new jobs. It's very easy to find new jobs, or internally we are reorganizing. And symptoms here are really about very often restructuring. I know organizations that at least once a year do restructuring in their organizations. That creates a lot of uncertainty in teams, team makeup. So that does something with people. Therefore, it does something with you as a leader. Difficulty in maintaining morale and cohesive team culture. I think that's a consequence of all these components. People are getting really tired sometimes of change. The change fatigue, as they call it, can become quite high, and it's something to really take into account. So let's have a look here also in the tooling and the techniques that we can apply as a leader. So first of all, I think the agile team structure is really something that you need to look at if you haven't done that yet. Agile is already for many years no longer just an IT way of working. It becomes an organizational way of working. And it's very comparable to what happens in IT, but there are also elements that are different from IT. But working in an agile way and creating agile structures with your team can be very helpful in dealing with all this. You do need to train and foster people to become a bit more resilient. They need to get used to reassigning tasks in a quick way, how to maintain focus on getting things done. Yes, it requires a number of capabilities, but those are trainable capabilities. Yes, you need clear role definitions, but you need to ensure you build in flexibility. I think that's also a very important, excuse me, an important one for everybody to understand. It is really an element for things to happen. And the last one, transparent communication. I think that's obvious, but you can create frameworks for it. You can choose channels. So a real good communication plan, and a thought through communication plan, also from a departmental perspective, is really helpful, and keeps you grounded in the way you communicate in a consistent way, in a concise way to your people and the rest of the organization. So I don't know many managers at the departmental level, for instance, that really think of themselves as responsible for their own communication plan. If you guide them in that actually gives them a lot of advantages, and they do see the opportunity to help structure this to their people, their teams, also outside of their teams. Therefore, expectations are managed in a better way on what the team can do or not do. So it really supports the team with the decision-making processes that we need to have in place. And it helps also the team members to maintain accountability for the things they stand for, they have to do, and the expectations. Another one is the uncertainty of role expectations. As already mentioned, things are shifting quickly. Reorganizations occurring. People are getting insecure about certain things, especially about what's expected of them. So symptoms you see there is that people become insecure. They have stress, potentially burnouts, because unclarity and uncertainty is something humans always try to mitigate in a certain way because they don't like it. So it provides a negative level of stress, which is not good for health. And once you get into the vicious cycle of burning your energy about thinking why and thinking how differently, etc., those sort of questions, that energy is no longer available for work, and is also no longer available for having pleasure at work. If that's the case, you, as a leader, you really have to do something and step up. And also, for instance, the challenges in aligning talent to emerging skills, needs, and goals is something. I'm not sure about your talents in the organization, but what I see happening is that also talents, for talents, I should say, it becomes more and more difficult to get the clarity on what's expected of them. And when they come in the beginning, they're highly flexible and curious. But once they understand how an organization, how to navigate an organization, maybe that's the best way of saying it. They also come in the same routines, in the same structures that the other people are in, and they start struggling in the same way. This is not how we want our brilliant talents to be evolving. They need to learn how to navigate an organization in a different way than the old people, if I can say it in that way, used to do. So there's also a higher need for ongoing training around these topics, because people need to come along in the way the organization develops. Here, well, the flexible role definitions I already mentioned in the previous section a little bit. The cross-training not. So the combination of the two, if you have a role definition with a level of flexibility in it, maybe it's worthwhile to take some time and talk people through, take them by the hand and inform them, maybe train them about it. What does that mean for you? How do you work in a different way? And maybe also people can shout out what they find is very difficult and find suitable training programs or coaching sometimes for those people to make sure they start mastering that way of working. Scenario planning we also mentioned on various different previous topics, but scenario planning for workforce strategy is a specific component of that. If you think of the macro or the meta developments that we see at a global scale, like silent resignation, flexibility of workforce, people have different reasons for going to work, want to have more purposeful work. In a minute we also touch on multi-gen teams. You will find that they have different needs and different value systems with them. So if you think of workforce strategy, you really have to take into account these sort of things. So you have to build scenarios for these. And last but not least, everybody knows lifelong learning is key in these days. In organizations, very concretely, that means we need to have a continuous skill development program. We expect different skills at certain moments in the career of people, so we also have to make sure we develop those skills. No questions so far? Okay. So let's look at interdependence between departments, especially in matrix organizations, as I said. So you'll find situations like overlapping roles, people from different silos or divisions do similar things, and you wonder why things have to be done twice or three times in more or less the same way. It causes a lot of confusion or frustrations with people. Duplicated work is never nice. Challenges in aligning teams is also very difficult because the interest of the teams will be different. So creating delays and miscommunication because they have different interests. So finding a way to align that in a better way and bringing people together is important. And the last point here, managing the interdependencies. Very often we manage them independently, and that means that they all want to achieve their own objectives, but not the shared objective overall. There also we need to make sure we bring teams and people together in this way. So here, one of the things we haven't seen so far, but is a real good tool to do, is do the process mapping for the sake of clarity. Process mapping means that you really map functions of people over the processes that you have in your organization. And then you can identify interdependencies. Then you get not just dependencies, but interdependencies. And I think that those are really important. And if you get an understanding of it by process mapping, then you can actually use that knowledge that you gain from it, the information and the insights that you gain from it, in, for instance, developing the job profiles with a level of flexibility into it. Another thing you could do is a regular alignment check-in. That means, on a monthly basis or maybe even a bit higher frequency, sit together with people and align on goals and responsibilities. Is this still what we expect of you? And do you still feel this is expected of you? Should you still report to the same person, or are you now in a project for a number of years maybe? So it's better to report to somebody else because that's the area where the project takes place. So there's a lot of reasons why you should do regular alignment checks with people to make sure they also feel comfortable in the way we are organized as a total. And last, empowerment and decision rights matrix. Decision rights matrix, that's something was also new for me, to be honest. So who has the authority to take certain decisions? Very often we do this at a financial level, and most managers know to which amount they can take decisions, and where no longer. But do you also define that for other sorts of decisions, like product development, or for engineering on things they can fix or not fix, and those sort of things? So I think that's important. And you can also develop, once you have this a little bit, on paper, you can also find hybrid ways of working in this. Wat zeg je? Ja, Lee hebt de vraag. Lee, your question is, how have you experienced AI being linked to employee... I have to look at my phone. Oh, it's here. Sorry, thanks, Ferry. And learning management system. That's a good question. It's starting, I think, I would say. I do experiment a lot with AI. I'm still very impressed with what it can do. Employee performance data is something that is not easily given free for AI tools to be looked at. So I think that's one. And the link to a learning management system I find highly interesting, because then you can really think around the skills and the skill development components of it when performance is not at the level that you expect it to be. So in that sense, I think the last part of your question, pushing training topics based on observed needs, is still the case. I think there are now developments in the AI world where AI also through, for instance, through camera observations in warehouses can actually observe. And let's take an easy example, for instance, from a health and safety point of view. Are they lifting parcels in the right way? Or should somebody be advised on lifting with a different technique? With cameras nowadays, you can actually identify that. That we are actually applying AI systems in warehouses now where the AI actually identifies near misses. Or obviously the incidents, but incidents are mostly already reported. So AI is able to identify near misses, so you can actually take proactive measures to avoid incidents to happen. So also that's maybe not performance in the way you mean it here, but at the same time, it's the starting point where privacy issues are not playing such an important role, because health and safety prevails privacy in most cases. But I do think your question is very relevant for the years to come. And AI will play a role in employee performance going forward. And then as a manager and as a leader, we can use this as an add-on to our own observations, and probably will help objectify the meanings that we develop about our employees. And I think that's very useful. So ambiguity on this slide, and it's the last one for this session. Then we go to the final, because it's almost 2 o'clock. Now, I think we should actually go to the next one, otherwise, because we're going to start this one. I just want to go to the last slide of this set, because I think there's a few nice graphs in this. And these are the topics we have discussed. If you think of how organizations score the importance of the problems they currently see, here you see an overview of what people score as most important. So clearly the concern is about mental health and well-being of our employees. It scores almost a 10. The same for the skill gap and talent shortages that we start identifying, but also digital transformation and automation. It's getting very exciting with AI now really coming to the table. At the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on the organizations, and especially on leaders, because this requires a lot of change. So this slide will be in your handout, obviously. I think also shows where we want to focus on first and next. The other last graph I want to show you is a nice one. I actually used ChatGPT to say, well, if you want to have a collaborative workspace, with a lot of networked components to it, and so on. So I made a really nice prompt out of it. ChatGPT gave me this picture with the comment that you actually see next to this picture. So I really wanted to share this, because AI is helpful. Now, the picture obviously is a bit of an abstract way of looking at it, but it does actually say a lot about how we need to work in the VUCA world these days. And so ChatGPT told me, this picture really represents a collaborative workspace featuring a networked organizational layout and highlighting cross-functional and agile teams. If you look at the picture, and if you're used to agile teams, you will see a lot of the performance boards and the scrum boards and those sort of things. The lines represent interconnection, etc. So I really liked it in that way. And the other one was the layout includes interconnected clusters, so people working together but being connected to another cluster, and showcasing the dynamic open design. So yeah, it's a one floor, it's open. It does represent, to my view, a bit of an agile workspace in that sense. I just wanted to show you because I think it's a nice one to see. And last but not least, I think, and this will be the last one before we go to the overall conclusions, multi-generation workforce. This is something we all have to manage. I'm a boomer, so I'm a minority now in most of the teams. So yeah, I think that's something just to consider. And you see here on this slide, won't go in details, but you see some of the values, the key values of them, how they prefer to work, but are strong in. But also there's some leadership implications on this slide. So this, I think, I try to build a summary for you as a giveaway. If you have 3-4 generations in your team, and most of us nowadays have, I think, it is actually difficult to get them together in the way you approach them, where one will have a more personal approach and is highly loyal. The other one will have a more purposeful approach and really wants to have a purpose for working in your team and at the organization that we are working. So bringing that together really is really good to understand that. So let's focus on, so I'll skip decision making and team dynamics, and they only had 2 slides each because I summarized them. I just want to show you what you will get in the handout from a coping strategy point of view. So I've built 7 slides or 8 slides on this. I think the first thing as a leader, what we can do is build emotional resilience. That's something important in the working in a VUCA environment. So every step what I did was give you an overview of what I mean with it, and then what steps could you use to actually implement this component as a leader with your teams. So I won't go through them in detail, something to read for you, but I think this is a really good takeaway from this session later on. How do you prioritize adaptability and how do you create continuous learning? Also some good steps. I just highlight them to you so you understand. So clear communication channels and how to do that. I think we said enough about the importance of it. Fostering agility in decision making, so create the flexibility there. Here you see again the OODA loop. Here is what I want to talk about it a little bit. So it's about observing, orienting, deciding, and acting. And this is an approach that was actually developed in the US military for it. And OODA loops have proven their value already in quite some organizations. And then the last 2, creating a culture of psychological safety. I think that's a really strong component. It's actually one of my favorites, because if your team members are able to really be themselves and speak out whatever is on their mind, without having any fear of having a setback for expressing what they think, or being afraid for making mistakes or saying things that they get a setback for. If you really can create a culture like that, that's not just to one person, that is something that needs to happen in the full organization or the full team, then you really become powerful with your team. And then last but not least, scenario planning. It was already mentioned a couple of times. Be prepared for the future. That's what scenario planning actually does. So you can always do the good, the bad scenario, etc. The conclusion really is that coping with VUCA is really about building resilience with the people and the organization itself, becoming adaptable, so more adaptability in the team, and a very strong team connection focus. So the teams need to be connected. By implementing these strategies, and I just gave you the highlights of what the slides can help you with. If you really implement these strategies, you can really create a workplace that not just survives, but can thrive amid the uncertainty and change that is all around us. So dealing with that is the key thing. And last but not least, if you really embrace these practices in a consistent way, you'll foster a team equipped to handle whatever challenges come their way. And it's nice in words, but I've experienced this a few times already in my career. If you really bring people together in an open way and in a safe way, they will start helping each other. in the end, you will need very little leadership capabilities to lead a team, because they will lead the team altogether. And then you can really focus on being a servant leader, understanding what people need for help, for support, be there for them, or if needed, take a step forward and catch maybe some of the criticisms in the organization, and relay that in a good way in the team, and to step back afterwards again to make the team function fully 100%. This is what I wanted to share about the VUCA world. It didn't match completely with the time, but most people are used of that from me. So sorry for that, but for the first time, it was difficult to guess how much time this actually will take. But this was more or less the content I wanted to share with you in approximately 1 hour. So I just need to breathe. So the next one will be coping strategies, right? Sorry, not coping strategies. Q&A. Any other questions you want to ask? Thank you for the questions on the way. So really great to have that interaction with you. Really grateful for that. Thank you, Peter, for giving that compliment. Interesting points. I have one final slide I would like to ask you. That is my closing point. Oh, sorry, did I miss something there? Okay. What I would like to ask you is in the chat, can you put a few keywords in there? What was the value that you really took away from this session? What do you think needs improvement, except for time management, because that one I already note down, and some other comments. And as a conclusion, at a scale 1 to 5, how would you rate this event, so I can learn from it and make it better next time? So we really appreciate if you could do that in the chat, and then we close the session. And I will make sure you get the full handout of this. And of course, the video recording will be available for you at any time via LinkedIn. Thank you very much. I have more sessions planned in the months to come. Check my website for that. And as I said, I also do this face-to-face, so let me know if it can be of any help. Lee. It seems to me VUCA is about how different climates impact your environment. Indeed. So if you say climates, I also read company culture or organizational culture in that way. I think that's the way you mean it. Yes. So also, I think the circumstances in the market, like the level of pressure or the level of change and those sort of things, really dictate how atmosphere in an organization is influenced. At the same time, if you really build resilience with the people and with your teams, it's much more easier to deal with it. So you will become less sensitive to the impact that different environments can bring to you as an organization. So I think the building of resilience is a key thing we as leaders need to do with people. That also means that we as a leader need to look in the mirror, and that we say, what's the role of a leader if you have really a resilient team and team members? So it also puts a big demand on the leaders themselves. Thanks, Lee. Inside. Thank you. So if you would leave me in the chat the answer to these questions, that would be really great, because that will be really learningful for me for the next one. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Have a great day and a great weekend, and I hope to see you next time.